All right. Okay. The remaining part of this unit, I know it says Cold War Part 3 of 3, is going to include some things that take place during the Cold War, such as the Falklands Malvinas War, as well as the Iran-Iraq War. Actually, the Persian Gulf War takes pretty much place within the Cold War era, too. Okay? So we're going to cover those three wars, and that will wrap up this unit. And we'll have a test on this unit. We'll give you plenty of fair notice, but obviously, we're much closer to the end of this unit than we are to the beginning of this unit. So we'll probably have a test on this, not the week we come back, but maybe like the next week. Yeah. So, yeah, maybe at the very, very end of the week that we come back. All right? On March 1st? Okay, well, it's not going to be March 1st. So maybe it'll be before then. Okay, March 1st? That's a Monday. You guys aren't in school on Monday. Oh, okay. So I know you guys have got a lot of various different things and so forth, but we'll just stay on top of this, review the notes and so forth, so that when you ultimately have to get ready for this test, it'd be like, just review for things, okay? So go over the notes and so forth. You can watch the videos that we've been making and so forth. Yeah, and I think the test is, did I write down how many questions? Like 65 or so? Anyway, all right, here we go. The Falklands Malvinas War, a very interesting war. It is a war taking place in Latin America, off of the coast of Argentina, in a region that the Argentines call Malvinas, some islands that they claim. Literally, if you look over here where I'm standing, it's all the way, it's not that far from Antarctica, really. It is way, way in the South Atlantic, okay? The country that is closest to it, of course, is Argentina. The country that lays claim to it and calls it not Malvinas, but calls it the Falklands, is the United Kingdom, okay? So let's go through. We're going to talk about, obviously, for those of you guys who are looking at the handout and so forth, this would be near the top of page 2 in your notes. You've got some of the key terms. It's not a bad thing to have that in front of you as you're going through there, so you know how to spell things like Exocet and Belgrano and Sheffield and Galtieri, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So this is an interesting war. You can write this down. It's as far as the type, nature, and combatants in the war, it's actually a fairly small war. It's going to be over very quickly. It lasts 74 days. And during much of that 74 days, there's not a lot of fighting going on necessarily. Okay? It takes place in the Falklands, Malvinas, and so forth, in the South Atlantic. South Georgia Island, which is a little bit further to the east, also is involved. But there's not most of the fighting actually takes place in the Falklands. And, get this down, in the waters off of the Falkland Islands. Or Malvinas, what have you. The number of people that actually die in this war is not massive, but it's felt hard by the two countries that lose these people. There will be dead 649 Argentines. 649. Wow, that's a fairly small number. There will be dead 255 British. That's it. There's going to be other casualties and so forth, wounded. But the number dead is actually fairly small. This is going to happen fairly quickly. There will be dead 3 Falkland Islanders, 3 civilians. I have no idea how many sheep are killed as a result of this. I imagine their losses are going to be fairly small. And you're like, why are we talking about sheep? Because on the islands themselves, there are nearly 500,000 sheep. That is the prime economic thing going on in the Falklands. Sheep grazing to produce wool that then is taken off and made into warm clothes that are worn by the people living in that very cold part of the world. The population, I don't know if this is accurate anymore. I wrote this down once upon a time. The population is half of the population of Star, Idaho. I think that actually maybe would be a third, because Star is growing pretty fast. There's just under 3,000 inhabitants in that entire area. It's okay, calm down, yeah. We'll have to deal with that later. Yeah. I don't know how many people are in STAR now. I don't know what the latest thing is. It is growing. It's one of the fastest growing communities and so forth. But anyway, there's only 3,000 people in the Falklands. And most, all of them, write this down, are British and would identify themselves as British. Got it? So if you took a poll of the people in the Falklands and said, hey, which do you prefer to be part of, Britain or Argentina? The answer would come back resoundingly, Britain. Okay, because as we'll see, the British had control, effective control of this territory for a long, long time leading up to the war. And, oh, by the way, spoilers, Britain wins the war. Yes, and Argentina loses the war. And you're like, well, is it obvious? No, it's not necessarily obvious. Yeah. And they still had enough of a good navy in 1982 to actually pull this thing off. Okay, it's going to be quite controversial on lots of different aspects. This is a really fascinating war because the war actually is going to help the political career of the winner, Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister, the first female British Prime Minister in history. Not the last. I think they've had at least one more since that time. It will hurt the political fortunes of General Leopoldo Galtieri, the Argentine president, leader of a military dictatorship that was taking place in Argentina at the time. So you can write these things down. This is all very, very important as part of the context of the war. Both of these political leaders were having difficulties politically prior to the war. In fact, you could look at this war and ultimately say the war occurred at the inception because of political difficulties of Galtieri. And arguably, perhaps Thatcher's response may have been political. It ultimately helped her politically. So as we tell the story of how this all plays out, because you're looking at this and you're like, why are two major, pretty good-sized countries going to war over some rocky, grass-covered outcrops in the South Atlantic that sustains a population of less than 3,000 people, oh yes, and 500,000 sheep? I mean, it's a good question. Yeah, and actually, and people in both countries are looking at like, really? Why did we get into this war? Why? I mean, both of them are looking. I mean, in one sense, it was good that the casualties were fairly small compared to, other wars, and that the war itself, lasted only 74 days. Okay, just starting on the Falklands War, lining this up. Okay, just 74 days. Why didn't Britain take over Argentina? Because unlike the Falklands, Argentina is full of Argentines. And they don't want to be under British rule, nor does Britain care to, be in charge of Argentina there. And in fact, write this down. The relations between Britain and Argentina, by and large, were pretty good in the long history of Argentina. Anybody know what country used to control Argentina? Spain, exactly. They speak Spanish there. When Spain lost control over its Latin American provinces and all these different countries came together, including Argentina, Britain soon moved into a very important relationship with those countries. Not only did Britain support their independence movement, but Britain moved in and did a lot of trading with those countries. Okay? Make a note on this. Argentina and Britain, in the Cold War context, are both on essentially the same side. Okay? Argentina is not a communist country. It does not favor the Soviet Union. It wouldn't really dare. I mean, it's probably looked at like what was going on in the United States of America and the CIA and so forth, and like, yeah, let's not go like Chile, too far to the left, because otherwise the United States might intervene. And of course, Britain is a stalwart ally of the United States during the Cold War. So this is not, it occurs during the Cold War, but it's not a Cold War competition. You can put this down, though. When this war took place, Britain received not so much military or financial support, but encouragement from European allies. Write this down. So the Europeans supported the British. They're like condemning Argentina, Because Argentina just came and grabbed the islands that were populated by British, English-speaking people. They were like, we shouldn't have come in here. The Latin American countries supported Argentina. They're like, yeah, you stupid imperialists, why are you still hanging on to bits and pieces of land when you should have given that up a long, long time ago? Got it? What about the United States? It's a good question, because we have very good relations with both. We officially stayed out of it as far as like, they didn't want nor need our military support. But we did give, write this down, we did give the British critical intelligence assistance as well as some equipment. And part of that was because of how it played out. Who started the war? Argentina did. Okay? Galtieri sent in the troops, and they took over. There was really like not much opposition. The sheep put up, the sheep didn't fight. Okay, they're not trained to defend the island. I mean, that would have been interesting, remote control sheep. Meh. I don't know. It's just weird. Nice little sheep. Yeah, is that wool? Yes. We'll get into it, okay? We're going to get into it. We're just sort of giving you some initial things here. Let's get to the origins and causes of the war, shall we? The origins and causes of the war, right? Falklands, Malvinas, whatever you have, has been in the South Atlantic for a long, long time. As far as like things in the Atlantic, not a bad thing to have, Ashton. What kind of islands does the United States find pretty helpful to us as far as our naval presence in the Pacific Ocean? Yeah, really, can you give me some examples? How are you at answering questions like that? Cuba's not in the Pacific Ocean. Okay. Hawaii, exactly, yeah. Hawaii probably the best example of where we established a really good naval presence. And there was some naval presence, a little bit, in the Falklands, but the British had a variety of different things over the years. And frankly, at this point in time, 1982, how much? 1982, seriously, write this down. How much of the British Empire was there left? Did they still have Australia or New Zealand or Canada or South Africa or any of the African areas? No. I mean, it's like, what else do they have? Well, they got the Falklands. Why? Because they want to stay and be part of Britain. It works out for them. Besides, make sure you have this written down. Argentina has had a claim on the Falklands for many, many, many years, going way back in history. And the English speakers of the Falkland Islands are like, we don't want to be part of Argentina. We wouldn't really fit in. So why is this? Why are we having a war here? All right, let's back it up. Yeah, I mean, it's like before 1800, going way back. You ready? Before 1800, at different times you would have French, British, Spanish control. It's kind of like, oh, this might be a good base. Oh, I don't know, maybe it's not that good of a base. And then they'd abandon it. Oh, let's take this, and then they would abandon it. Well, here's the deal. The Spanish set up, in the early 1800s, a prison colony on those islands. The islands that we're talking about that are part of this. It's the same place. I thought I established that. Maybe I didn't. That's important. Argentina calls it the Malvinas. That's their special name for it. Huh. Okay? It's like, do your parents call you by a special name that you don't want anybody else to call you by? Yes? Oh, here we got an answer from Mary. It's okay. You don't have to share that. But I'm sure it's adorable. Okay? So, I mean, it's not an adorable name that that Argentina calls it, but they call it Malvinas. And the British call it Falklands. It's the same place. Okay? All right. So, the Malvinas is a prison colony for Spain until 1811. Then they abandon it. 1811. So it's abandoned as a prison colony. Now, probably the more significant... Oh, wait. And then, of course, when Argentina gains its independence in 1816, it claims those islands as part of its territory, But other than that, really doesn't do much to sort of like establish control. Do you understand that? There's a principle in the law that basically says, you know, possession is 9/10 of ownership. You literally, if you possess something, that it really helps to prove that you actually have it. You go into court and you're like, I possessed that for many years. And then somebody else comes into the court and goes, yeah, well, I claimed it before you possessed it. Who's going to win on that one? Do you have those issues? I used to have those issues all the time growing up. We had like a television, and I had 5 sisters and a brother, right? And there was only like, you know, 3 channels on the television. You're like, oh my gosh, that's so old. And so like, if there was something on the television, maybe we agreed after a major fight as to what was going to be on the television. But then, who gets the primo seat? And of course, one sibling would say, I saved it. And you're like, when did you save it? Because I'm sitting in it right now watching my television show. And they said, I laid claim to it a half an hour ago because I said it. Anyway, it's like, whatever. So here's Argentina coming into existence in 1816. They're like, that's ours. But they don't really do anything with it. Okay? They don't really do anything with it. 1828, British settlers come in. Okay? British settlers. And what do you suppose the British settlers are going to do with that cold, wind-swept collection of islands? This is in the early 1800s. Don't be ridiculous. Bad answer. That was a clue. Bad answer. They raise sheep. There you go. Right. There you go. What else can you do besides, you know, I don't know. So they start raising sheep there. Okay? Yeah. So, but here's the interesting thing. So the British people just start showing up and raising sheep, and then Britain's like, well, there's sheep on the island. And English-speaking people. So in 1833, Britain officially reestablishes like a control over the island. So there's your point in time. From 1833, Britain has and maintains control over the islands, along with English-speaking people and sheep-speaking sheep. Okay? They have a very bad accent. Okay?
What was the nationality of the people living there prior to Britain takeover?
Well, the thing is, it's like, so there was a Spanish... Oh, I don't know. There's English, Scottish, I don't know. They're English. They're English. They speak English with a variety of accents. But they're part of the United Kingdom. Okay? So here we've got 2 claims to that land. The Spanish, arguably having perhaps maybe Argentina having perhaps an earlier claim. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's like this. It's confusing. But the reality is, everyone looks and goes, oh, it's British, you know, because they've got the sheep there and they've got the British people speaking there, and Argentina has a claim to it, and it's like, whatever, you know. It's like you get these weird, like in recent history, there's weird, stupid fights over uninhabitable, high-range, rocky territory that's claimed by India and China. Have you read about that in the news? It's crazy. Oh, it's nuts. You can look it up. I mean, literally, they've been actually fighting recently, which gives you a sense that China is getting a little bit more aggressive, perhaps, over various different things. And I can see why in the South China Sea they want to establish a little bit more control. But seriously, a high mountain, rocky border dispute? And they've been getting into fights. You know how those fights end up? With guys getting pushed down the mountainside and dead. I mean, it's like, what the heck? It's not what? Oh, well, that would be great if you're like, I'm going to be in the Indian Army. Okay, well, you're going to have this cold, rocky outpost that you're going to defend against Chinese, and the Chinese start showing up, and they start pushing you down, throwing rocks at you, and throwing you down the side of the mountain. Anyway, so, I mean, at least on the Falklands, you can actually live there. Okay? All right, so we go through the 1800s, it's British. We go through the 1900s, it's British. Of course, now write this down. I think you know this. I mean, we've already kind of covered this. Where was Britain by 1982 as compared to, say, 100 years earlier?
They were small.
Are they a great, big, powerful empire?
I mean, they're powerful, but they're not big.
They're powerful, yeah. I mean, they've got an important economy and so forth, but their empire is pretty much gone. Okay? Do they have a need for a big military presence around the world? Or should they focus their military presence, say, on protecting Britain from, I don't know, whatever, Soviet and so forth, threats and so forth? Now, put this down. Difficult British times. Their empire is gone, it's gone, it's gone. South Africa is gone. Canada is gone. I mean, the Queen can show up and do all kinds of things and wave at all the different people in different parts of the world that are part of the British Commonwealth, but ultimately, those people are in charge of their countries. Okay? And put this down as well. Tough economic times. The 1980s were kind of tough on a lot of different countries. Reagan was dealing with an economic recession, the early 1980s. Britain was like, should they justify continuing to have a large military budget? Write it down. Their military budget had shrunk by that time. They're like, we don't need to have as big of a navy and an army to meet the needs of, just protecting the British Isles. Well, and actually, if you look, and if you give a measure of the British military today, it's less than it was in 1982. As far as the number of people and the number of ships and so forth, it's less. Okay? So that's going on there. Right? You got Margaret Thatcher, and she's, in charge of Britain. She's conservative, and she's been making changes and basically sort of, going blow to blow with, take your pick. Labor unions. She's been denationalizing certain components of the British economy, getting very tough with the IRA, the situation in Northern Ireland where those guys get caught, they get put in prison, and they want to be treated as political prisoners, and they go on hunger strikes, and she's like, no, you're a criminal, I'm not going to do anything about it, and then they die. Anyway, so there's when Margaret Thatcher ultimately died of natural causes and so forth, there were people who had long-standing opposition to her, and they cheered when she died. Okay? Well, there were other people in Britain that felt very strongly in favor of her, and actually the United States, Reagan and so forth, appreciated her because she was a stalwart ally in the Cold War, yada, yada, yada. The thing that's going to bring this to a head, though, is what's going on in Argentina. Write this down. In Argentina, there was a military coup in 1976. And without getting into all the details of what was going on in Argentina, they had democratic elected political situation, but, sometimes it was a little corrupt, sometimes it was a little... Their last populist leader was a guy by the name of Juan Perón. Okay? And there was some corruption going on in there, but he was very much a populist. The poor people really liked him. They really loved his first wife.
What about his next wife?
Evita. Have you guys ever heard of Evita, the musical Evita and so forth? She was a very popular singer and so forth. Madonna played the primary role in a movie called Evita, which was based on the musical called Evita. Madonna's actually can do some pretty good acting. League of Her Own, about baseball and stuff. Yeah, she was good in that one. Anyway, so there's a military power. There is a junta. Do you remember junta? Actually, you guys wouldn't have done junta because I did that in the 9th grade. Junta. Military committee, Junta. Military dictatorship is in charge of Argentina. I'll give you the years. From 1976, when they got rid of Perón, because it's too chaotic and so forth. They're like, we're going to be in charge. And of course, the United States is like, let me see, are you still anti-communist? Okay, fine, whatever. And they actually will be in there until 1983. I wonder what happened to make the military dictatorship very unpopular in Argentina. Did they get into a war that failed? Yeah, anyway. So, from 76 to 1983, 1976 to 1983, you've got a military dictatorship. And it's going to be really bad for people who oppose the military dictatorship. There's going to be a lot of Argentines that are going to be sort of disappeared. You can write this down. They're going to be disappeared. Kind of like what happened in Chile after Pinochet came into power. If you were a musician and you were in favor of the previous power, the elected officials and so forth, they'll make you disappear. And so you're going to have all these different mothers and so forth that will come out publicly and hold up the pictures of their disappeared sons and uncles and husbands and so forth and going, where are they? They call it the Dirty War. You can write that down, the Dirty War. This is where the Argentine military dictatorship is really doesn't want to deal with any criticism from within the ranks. And after Let me tell you this. After the dictatorship is over, we'll actually get some answers. And some of them are pretty sad, right? Because then there's this question of like, well, what really happened when the dictators were in charge and what really happened to these people who disappeared? Well, some of them, this one, like Argentine Air Force colonel, it was like really bugging him. I can see why. It was really bugging him because one of the jobs that he had during the time of the dictatorship was to do flights out over the Argentine Ocean, or the Atlantic Ocean, whatever, beyond the coast of Argentina, and then turn around and come back after they opened the doors and pushed out political prisoners. That's how they disappeared. There's the answer. Yeah. No. The dirty war is like this internal situation where the dictatorship is like cracking down on them. The irony is like what really ultimately created the most pressure on this dictatorial government? Economic conditions. Write it down. They had horrible economic conditions in Argentina at that time. Inflation running about, I don't know, what's a high inflation rate for you guys? It's 5% high? It's pretty high. When I was your age, I mean, we were dealing with like inflation in the teens, which is a lot. They were dealing with 600% inflation rate. Yeah, during that particular time period. The GDP was heading south fast, had dropped like 11.4% in the time leading right prior to this. So when you have this inflation and economic conditions and so forth, it's like, well, let me see, you know, how good is a military dictatorship in handling an economy? Yeah, it's like, is that kind of part of the normal thing for military officers to deal with? Not really. So here's what they decide to do. They're kind of looking at this, you know, they're kind of like, well, let me see. What would the United States do? There really was a question. What would the United States do if we did something? If Egypt took over the Suez Canal without permission from the British, who did we favor? We helped out Egypt. India took away Goa. We didn't really talk about that much. It was a Portuguese area in India. India took it away, and that was gone. We did, yes, separately and so forth. Yeah. So here's Argentina. It's basically, the key word is distraction. Distraction, distraction, distraction. If you can't make the Argentine people happy by governing the country in a way that like is economically prosperous, let's have a good war. Let's go beat up the British and take over some territory that we've had claim over a long period of time. I'm sure the British won't do anything about it, so that's what they decided to do. They landed troops there. Okay, so the war actually starts with, let me see, this was in March. The Argentines just go ahead and land troops there and take it over. They had been in negotiation with the British over like a peaceful handover, and the British are like, no, the people don't want to be part of Argentina. I don't care if you've got some claim going way, 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 way back, forget it. But Galtieri's like, this will make the Argentine people happy. We can do this. We can get away with this. Put this down. He thought Thatcher would blink. Don't get into a staring contest with Margaret Thatcher. She won't blink. There were a lot of people in the British government, write this down. There were a lot of people in the British government that were like, this is not worth it. This is going to cost us a lot of money in addition to lives. But she didn't want to blink. She organized a fleet of 127 ships. They left Britain and they headed south. 127 ships in this flotilla. They headed south, and I tell you what, when they got there you go, there's the flotilla heading all the way south. And there will be war. And it will be decisive. It will be bloody, although it's not going to be as bloody as it potentially could be because there's not going to be that many casualties. And the British will ultimately win. We'll fill in some more of the details. I think we ran out of time now. We'll fill in some more of the details next time. Tomorrow, yeah, tomorrow. And we'll wrap that up. Okay? Yeah, don't mess with Maggie. The Iron Lady. She tough. Okay.